Welcome to the Let Your Heart with Hope podcast. I'm Erin, and I'm so thankful you're here. My hope and prayer are that through listening to today's episode, God will encourage you and do immeasurably more than all you can ask or imagine. It doesn't matter how long we live, but how we live. We can choose to live defined by our past or hopeful for the future. We can live in hiding or we can live in the light. We can live in bondage or we can live in freedom. We can live buried in pain, or we can uproot the moments of joy found in the valley. In today's message, Lesa shares her story and how she chose joy in the midst of her heartache. She learned that even though they walk hand in hand, joy is a choice. Lesa shares how she daily, moment by moment, made the conscious decision to choose joy. Even in the painful parts of her story, she knew that God was the author and trusted in his greater plan written throughout every page. Life isn't easy. It's often filled with painful valleys, but life can still be found in the valleys. Joy can still be found in seasons of pain.
My name is Lesa Brackbill, and I live in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I met my husband, Brennan, in 2009 after I moved to Pennsylvania from California. I never planned to meet him that Easter Sunday. I didn't know that when I was introduced, I was meeting my future husband. But Easter has come to play, and it's a very significant part of our life and our journey. So we got married in 2010. We waited a few years to have children because we just wanted to enjoy marriage. And in 2014, our daughter, Victoria, who we called Tori, was born. I remember distinctly saying to Brennan that it was about 2 weeks after Tori was born. I said, I guess everything with that test was okay. By that test, I meant newborn screening, which I did not have any idea what it was. And they really didn't talk to us about it. But since we didn't hear anything, I thought, oh, we must be fine. So we just went on cherishing our firstborn daughter. And it was about 5 months, 5.5 months, that it was like a switch flipped. All of a sudden, our previously happy, healthy, so expressive daughter was irritable. She didn't smile anymore. She didn't play. She had regressed in every single milestone. And it took me a couple weeks to realize that maybe we should be concerned because, the internet, wonderful Google will tell you, oh, it's normal. Maybe it's just reflux. The other thing that we kept seeing was that if they're working on other milestones, they might regress in some. So we just kind of went with it, though I thought it was really strange. So finally we went to the pediatrician who misdiagnosed her with reflux. The meds didn't work. That led to a Friday night trip to the ER for a CAT scan to see what was going on, because he then had the theory that maybe it was hydrocephalus. So that was an awful Friday. In fact, everything that happened with Tori happened on Fridays. That night, we were told that our daughter had brain abnormalities. And that's all the resident would say, which I do appreciate in retrospect because she was not a neurologist and she didn't want to speak out of turn. But to hear those words was devastating. And we obviously had no idea that the news was about to get worse and worse. And so that next Wednesday, she had an MRI. That was actually a miracle because they originally couldn't get her scheduled until May. And this is January, February. But the neurosurgeon, he had seen the CAT scan and he said, no, you're getting in tomorrow morning. And so she had an MRI on Wednesday that led to the first diagnosis day of leukodystrophy 2 days later. That night, Tori went into the hospital to get a feeding tube because she still wasn't eating well and she was throwing everything up. And so if we had only known that those 5 days were going to be some of the hardest in our life, I feel like we would have been a little more prepared, or tried to be a little more prepared. I recently actually looked at Tori's chart from those 5 days, and I noted that someone wrote in her chart, the parents are not handling all of the bad news very well. And I had to laugh because I was like, I mean, this is years later that I just now saw this, but I'm like, first of all, how did you expect us to react when you find out your daughter cannot swallow? She probably can't see. She's not going to get better, all these things. But then I also realized they didn't do anything about it. They drew her blood on Thursday, and this was February 12th. They told us it would probably take a couple of weeks to send it to Dr. Wenger's lab, and then we would hear back. So the next day, Friday the 13th, when we got a call from the neurologist's office, we knew that this was either really good or really bad. Going back a few days, when she had an ophthalmologist visit when we were in the hospital, the ophthalmologist had said, if it's Krabbe, the vision usually goes first. And I was like, I don't know what that word is, but it sounds like we don't want it. So imagine our horror when we found out that she had Krabbe. In retrospect, I really appreciate the way the neurologist delivered the news, because she came in and she just directly said, it's Krabbe. There was no trying to sugarcoat it. And of course we wept, and she gave us some time. But the worst two parts of that day were hearing that there was nothing they could do about it. And we were like, it's 2015. What do you mean that there's nothing that you can do about it? But then I should say there's actually three things. The second thing was finding out that if she had been screened for it at birth, they could have tried to treat it. But of course she wasn't. And then in the same appointment, the neurologist gently said, you might want to not have more children naturally because of the genetic risk. That was a big day. Honestly, diagnosis day was the worst day of our life. It was harder than the day Tori went to heaven. But that first month, I mean, I've never actually looked at a calendar, but I would estimate it was really the first month that we just grieved. And we didn't know what to do with this. We felt betrayed by God a little bit, as I think everybody does in this situation. We felt powerless. There was nothing we could do except try to make her comfortable. At the same time, we're learning how to use all this new equipment, things like a suction machine and terrifying things. It's only been in the recent, maybe 6 months that I've recognized just how traumatic all of that was. But because of my faith, because of my determination to give Tori a good life, I think I kind of brushed that away. I just kind of put it aside. After that first month, Brennan and I were talking, and we made a conscious decision to choose joy and to give Tori the best possible life that she could have. Honestly, not only for her sake, but for ours. We had the choice to spend what would end up being the next 14 months just grieving at home, not trying to do anything because it was so hard. And it was hard to lug that equipment around. And, it took a lot of our energy, emotional and physical, but we decided, based on what some other families that we had now been put in touch with had done, to make a bucket list. And it grew as her life went on. We kept adding things that either were suggested or adventures that were provided for us. So we would just add it to the list. And they varied from jumping in a mud puddle, something simple, something every child should do, to going to Disney World. And we have no idea what Tori got out of any of this, but we made memories. We have thousands of pictures, and we at least have the assurance that we tried. And I know that someday when we join her in heaven, she's going to have a lot to say about those adventures. But I just hope that more than anything, she knew that we tried to give her joy and experiences and the best kind of life that we could, despite the fact that we couldn't change her prognosis. So she did pretty well for those 14 months. She was never hospitalized. She never got sick. All of those are miracle things, because these children typically struggle so greatly. But it was about February of 2015 that she started having what we called blue episodes. And we started to sense that it was probably going to be the end soon. But where we really saw God was that we were supposed to go to California March 17th. We were supposed to fly out there. That's where I'm from. We had all sorts of bucket list adventures planned for her, and it was going to be a wonderful time with family, but also some respite for us because we would have people to help care for her. That day, Dr. Escolar called, and because we had called to get her signature for the oxygen concentrator and things like that. And she said, I really don't think that you should fly with her, because at her last visit, she had seen extra fluid in the brain. And she said, honestly, that pressure could harm her or even kill her. So we had to at the last minute decide we're going to drive, which is crazy. It is a very long drive, but we were so desperate to cling to whatever chance at an adventure we had with her that we went ahead and we just got in the van and we drove. We made it as far as Cleveland, not very far. And we realized, because of weather that was awaiting us on our route and a few other things, we realized we really should just go home. So we did. My parents flew out. We rented an RV, which allowed us to take Tori around. We went around New England. So we still had an adventure, but it was much safer for her. We made it home on March 26th, which is my mom's birthday. And she had her worst flu episode yet. Her oxygen dropped to 4%. And we were like, oh my gosh. Part of those 6 weeks that was the hardest on us was that every time she had one of those episodes, we had the stress of, is this it? Is this your time? When is your time? And so every time that happened, our hearts just, they hurt a little bit more. I don't know how else to describe it. It was trauma. And so that night, March 26th, Brennan let me sleep upstairs so that I could get some good rest. At 5 a.m., my phone rang, and it took me a second to realize what was going on. And then I picked it up and I heard him suctioning her and just saying her name. And so I ran downstairs and she was gone. And at a little after 9, she took her last breath, and I told her it was okay. Because honestly, the fact that it happened on Easter meant so much to us, because that's the day that gives us hope. And the significance that's when I met Brennan was on Easter Sunday. And so it just was like full circle, such closure, such hope. But I can truly say that because we chose to trust God through this, even though we didn't want this to be our story, but because that this is just the story he gave us, and we trusted him through the process, that day brought us peace and closure, because we knew it was finished. Her journey, her battle was finished. Our journey as caretakers was finished, because it was so hard. I don't think people understand, and I don't want them to understand, because I don't want anybody to go through this, but I don't think they understand how challenging it is to be a caretaker of a terminally ill child, because you're just struggling every single day between joy and sorrow. And so, of all the lessons that Tori taught us, I would say reflecting on the brevity of life is what has had the most impact on us. There's actually a verse in Psalms, the book of Psalms, that talks about that. Teach us the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom, I believe is what it says. I can't remember exactly. And even as recently as the last 2 years, I've really been reflecting on what that verse means. And I believe that it teaches us that the length of our life doesn't matter as much as how much we pour into it, what we try to give to others, how we love others. And I think Tori's a perfect example of that, because she only lived for 20 months. But in those 20 months, she taught so many people so much about how to live life with joy, how to live life wisely. And I know for us, she also taught us that you can live with two different emotions at the same time, fighting in a battle, much like in the cartoon Inside Out. You can live with both joy and grief simultaneously. You just have to focus on the joy. And that was not always easy for us. One of the practical ways that we focused on the joy was to have a bucket list for her. And as we were focusing on accomplishing these things and giving her life experiences and doing normal things, quote unquote, with our daughter, that reminded us of the joy of life. And so even though she only lived 20 months, we have a lifelong lesson that we've carried with us about joy. And sometimes it really takes just stopping yourself, refocusing, taking a deep breath, and even just gratitude. Gratitude plays into that too. We would focus on what we were grateful for instead of the incredible amount of things that we could have complained about. And we did complain about, honestly. And I think that that lesson about joy and heartache coexisting is one of the most profound that we learned, because the joy doesn't replace the heartache. They just fight in a tension every day, and you have to choose which one's more important. The greatest things that God has taught me through Tori's life does all relate to joy, really. Joy and peace. One of the things that I remember reflecting on as I was struggling while she was suffering from Krabbe was that verse in James that talks about considering it all joy. And I really struggled with that, because this was not joy, especially at first. The first month after diagnosis is really when we hurt the most and struggled the most as we were trying to grasp our new reality. And then I had this thought that I believe was from the Holy Spirit, that maybe the joy that James is referring to is not actually in that moment, but rather a joy deferred. Because now that we have lived through everything that we did with Tori, we have such a greater appreciation for life. Recognizing that life is brief has helped us to embrace it even more. And I know this probably sounds cliche, but to us, it's been profound, because life is short. We just lived through a pandemic where so many millions of people lost their lives prematurely. Krabbe steals lives prematurely. We are not guaranteed tomorrow. Scripture tells us that. So I am very grateful that we have this daily reminder, moment by moment. Sometimes, whenever I see her picture, of just remembering that it doesn't matter how long we live, it matters how we choose to live it. And we believe that's how we've seen God the most. It's just in that reminder. And then we have tried to be that reminder to other people. Even though these things happen, joy. You can make joy a priority. And sometimes it's not easy, but if you focus on Jesus, if you focus on the promise of eternity that we have, then the things that happen in this life are not nearly as troublesome. They are troublesome, but if you remember that this is just a small part of the life that God has planned for us, then it gives you perspective. I think I miss just holding her the most. I spent literally hours a day holding her, especially because at the beginning she had so much nerve pain and that's all she wanted. And so I miss the cuddles, the snuggles. I miss her eyes. I guess I miss not being so troubled by things like the dishes and cleaning up the house, because she also couldn't make a mess. So there was an advantage to that. Now the twins make a humongous mess all the time. Obviously, I love that. I love that they can make a mess, because Tori couldn't. But with her, I was really taught, again, just what matters. And what mattered was loving her and taking advantage of every second, every second that I could, to just comfort her and hug her, because I knew that there would be a day when I couldn't. Knowing that this is just a small gap in our time with her brings so much comfort, because I know there's a day when we will get to hold her again, and we will get to see her grow up, we believe. Obviously, scripture is not very clear about what age we are when we go to heaven, but we have this hope that we will get to see her in a childlike form, doing things that a child should do. running around with all of her crabbe buddies that have been waiting for all of us. Okay, but that's the hope that we hold on to, is that one day we will get up there. She will have been waiting for us, but it will have felt like just a mere minute, a mere second to her, because she's living her best life right now. And so that the eternity aspect of all of this definitely brings the most comfort and joy to us. We definitely have been asked often, how did you get through this? How did you survive? Or people will say, I could never do that. And to that I respond, I hope you never have to. That's my deepest hope. That's why I fight for newborn screening for leukodystrophy, so that you don't have to wonder how we did it. Because honestly, there were so many days where I felt like I wasn't doing it well. Whether you have faith or not, it's okay to have those times where you're like, this is too much. Because it was too much to find out that she couldn't swallow, that she was going to have to be tube fed, that her life was going to be shortened, all these things that a parent should never have to hear. But you have a choice in that moment to continue to focus on the bad things, or you can shift your focus, and it is a moment by moment process most of the time. I processed it by writing, by blogging, and most of it was just prayers, very, very open, raw prayers, because I didn't know what else to do. And I just pleaded with God, and a lot of those didn't end up being answered the way that I wanted. And that was really hard. One of the prayers that I had that didn't get answered was for sleep, because Tori did not sleep ever, except when I was holding her in the middle of the day, of course. And I remember just being like, God, I just want to sleep. But now I try to look back and reframe that. Be like, you gave me all like that extra time with Tori, even though I was beyond exhausted. So a lot of it just for me, for surviving, was about reframing and just saying, okay, I am so sleep deprived, but I only have this much time with her. So I'm going to choose to cherish it, even if I'm falling asleep. So I don't honestly know what to recommend to get people through this, except for prayer, just being open and honest with God and with others about what you need. Tori passed away 6 years ago, and we still are sensing the effects, even more so now. So I feel like it's not something that you just survive and then then your child passes away and you're okay. You're always going to need the Lord. You're always going to need those who understand what is going on. And that's okay. It's okay to not be okay. There's a quote that I had written that I feel like sums up like the life that we choose to live now. So one of the thoughts that I had after Tori passed away was this: the depth of my love for my daughter is not measured by the number of tears I have cried, but rather by the life I choose to live in her absence. And that goes beyond advocacy work. That goes beyond everything that I'm trying to do to prevent others from suffering this. But this also plays into the daily moment by moment decisions that we have to make as we parent her brothers, as we live this life in general. The life that I choose to live in her absence is how her legacy is continued. And so that drives everything that I do. If it were not for Tori, I would not be the person that I am today by any means. In fact, I recently, for my first graduate school class, I had to do a personal portfolio. And as I was reflecting on everything that I have, quote, accomplished in the last 6 years, I realized every single one of those things is because of Tori. None of it would have happened without her. And so I try to always keep that at the forefront of my mind, that she needs to have a legacy, and that legacy is going to come through Brennan and me.
Even when life is a battlefield, we can choose to trust in the God who can turn our brokenness into something beautiful. Life is short. How are you going to choose to live? Thank you so much for being here. I hope that Lesa's story encourages you to share your own story. You matter, your life matters, and your story can make an impact that matters for eternity. Make a difference today for someone who is fighting for their tomorrow.